drawing it all together to try and bring up a new picture of a new reality. My latest book will be on the pineal gland and how the pineal gland seems to access information from alternate realities. And I'm attempting to do the science of how the pineal gland does this. So, this is the real deal. This is something really I'm so excited about.
This is the gland, the part of the brain that experiences things like it's activated in springtime, for example. It is somehow aware of sunlight and that sort of thing, isn't it? It's a sort of it's a sensation center.
Correct. It's one of the great mysteries as to how the pineal gland excretes something called melatonin, and melatonin is the substance that makes you go to sleep. Okay. Now the pineal gland is deep within the brain. In fact, it's one of the few structures that is not repeated in the brain. As you probably know, you have a right and left hemisphere, but you also have a right and left amygdala and hippocampus and various other structures in the brain. But the pineal gland sits alone, and it sits in the dead center of the brain. In certain animals, the pineal gland is an ossified eye. In fact, in certain animals, it has a lens, it has a retina and everything else. It's long been believed that the pineal gland is in fact our own third eye that's actually moved back into the head. Now, if it has certain elements of an eye, it processes light, but it's deep within the brain. So the light it is processing is not the light from the external world. It's another form of light. And in my new book, I suggest that this light is something called biophotons. It's light bioluminescence. It's light that's given off by the cells. Not only this, it's light given up by something very, very profoundly important called DNA. DNA gives off light. This is the light that comes up from our own DNA. And again, as fellow Scousers, one of the things, there was a guy called, I think it was Fritz Albert Popp, who was a German research scientist at the University of Liverpool. And he was the first guy, I think I'm right in saying, that first discovered the existence of biophotons. In fact, get this, recent research I've read actually has shown there's a guy called Bocken, who I'm now in contact with. I swapped emails with him a couple of days ago, who's a research scientist, I think, in Hungary. And he has evidence that the eyes give off light. In other words, the eyes don't just take in light, they send light out into the external world.
So until now, the process that we've been through, as we've got cleverer, as we built what we think is an industrial society and thereby polluted the planet and done all the rest of it, but we think that we've improved things. But what we've actually done is we've moved away from all of this. And so when we stand there at Stonehenge and we think to ourselves, how the hell did they do this and what did it mean? The things you're talking about could be the answers to those questions. Those people were actually not as stupid as we think they were. They were, in fact, cleverer than we are.
Oh, totally. I mean, in my next book, I trace how certain ideas traveled along the Silk Road from ancient Sumer. And in fact, these particular concepts seem to suggest that there was a civilization that seeded Sumer. And I believe this civilization was the civilization that was aware of the pineal gland and the power of the pineal gland. Not only that, but I think the intelligence that guides us all is our own DNA. It is DNA. We are literally beings who exist in this three-dimensional universe of whatever nature it is in order for DNA to continue. It's DNA that's sentient. It's DNA that's intelligent. And it's DNA. Sorry, yeah.
Sorry. Do you believe that DNA, because a lot of people have talked to me over this last year or so about DNA and its nature, is something that maybe was given to us by, for want of a better word, extraterrestrials, and at the moment is being manipulated and changed by them? It is said that our DNA is changing.
Yeah, the DNA. Yeah, no, I believe that whether there's the extraterrestrial hypothesis, there's the concept of the Anunnaki, the lizards that were supposedly the people who started off the Sumerian civilization. Now, I think the symbolism of the serpent and the lizards is quite precise because people, when they have DMT experiences, consistently see snakes. It's the snakes and the snakes are a symbol of DNA because, of course, the DNA, the spiral of DNA. Did you know, for instance, that Francis Crick, when he discovered DNA, had great problems in trying to understand how the structure of the atom worked? He took an LSD trip, and in an LSD trip, he saw snakes swirling round each other. When he came to, he realized how the structure of DNA worked. In other words, DNA told Crick how its structure worked.
Wow. And if you think about it, I know people who've maybe taken too many tranquilizers to try and get off to sleep. And they've had an experience like that, and they've said, I saw snakes climbing up the wall. It's such a common thing.
It happened to me. In fact, we haven't got time now, but I work with two Austrian researchers. One's a consultant neurologist and the other is a consultant psychologist. And they have developed something called the lucid light device. And this machine stimulates the endogenous, that is the internal excretion of dimethyltryptamine within the pineal gland when you use it. Now, funnily enough, Howard, will have that machine in Liverpool on the 2nd and 3rd of March next year. When I'm inviting these guys over, I'm doing an event in Liverpool, and we will have a lucid light machine with us, and people can come along on that day and can test it for free.
I think I'd like to be back home on that day.
Oh,
on those 2 days.
This machine will change the world. This is the facilitator, I believe, of the opening of the Ajna chakra, the opening of the third eye for most of us.
Now, you mentioned pop and work that had been done in Liverpool and the fact that we are both Scousers. I have this theory about Liverpool, apart from being one of the most creative places on the planet, second only, I believe, to New York.
Yeah.
Liverpool is one of the most open-minded places. So if ever there was a crucible for thinking differently about who we are, and what everything is, Liverpool is that place. It's just a fact. And this isn't Mersey pride speaking, because I've lived away from Liverpool for 20-odd years now. It just, as I reflect on my home city, which I often do, it's just a fact, an objective fact, that this is such a creative melting pot of ideas.
Do you know, I moved back. I moved away to go to university back in 1973. And I moved back around about 8 years ago. And I lived around for 7 years back at home. And I was amazed at Liverpool as a place. It was vibrant. It was creative. And I made some fantastic friends up there. And indeed, a group of individuals up there, which we now call the Walker Group, because we used to consistently meet.
The Walker Art Gallery.
The Walker Art Gallery in the tea room there. And we now know it as the Walker Group. If you go onto Facebook and look up the Itlad Walker Group, we're still and they still meet. And we used to meet and discuss the ideas put forward in my books. And indeed, you probably know I was a regular on BBC Radio Merseyside with Billy Butler. I was on every fortnight with Billy, putting forward a lot of my ideas. And the responses I used to get from my fellow Scousers were phenomenal. And that is because they have a certain
open-mindedness.
Yeah, it's incredible. But without being cynical, people will argue really heavily with you. You know, they're not stupid, and they have no truck with the sillier aspects of this movement. But
at least they're honest enough to be the first to tell you if they think it's a load of old garbage.
They certainly do in no uncertain terms, absolutely.
But I can remember years ago interviewing the open-mindedness of it and the ability of Liverpudlians to accept everything, I think is reflected a lot through art. I remember one of the first interviews I did was with a Liverpool artist who talked like that. I mean, he really did sound like Ringo Starr. It wasn't Arthur Dooley, very famous. God, I don't think Arthur Dooley's with us anymore, but what a fantastic... If you remember Arthur Dooley, look him up. But he was amazing. This guy was certainly very much after Arthur Dooley's thought process. He'd, to make a point on all kinds of levels, he'd nailed a chicken to a crucifix. And of course, I went along as the reporter and said, why'd you want to go and do that sort of thing? And he explained to me very cogently why this was a very good idea for getting a point across. And I'll never forget the last question that I asked him. I said, do you plan to do anything like this again? And he just looked at me and he said, always. Always. A great crucible of ideas. What are you working on at the moment? You told me there is a new book in the pipipeline. You gave me a little sketch of that.
Yeah, very excited. The new book that will be out beginning of next year at the moment is roughly entitled the Gateway to Infinity, and this will be my take on how we are opening up the pineal gland, and it will be a full research of the pineal gland historically, anthropologically, scientifically, neurologically, physiologically, the whole thing. I'm reviewing the whole thing, and the information I have got from this is stunning me. This book will be out next year, and after that, my next project, which I'll be starting tomorrow, is going to be a biography of the American science fiction writer Philip K. Dick.
Really, I've heard a lot about Philip K. Dick.
Oh, this guy is. I'm in touch with. He had 5 wives. I'm in touch with 2 of them at the moment. 2 of them that are still alive.
Really?
I'm also in touch with quite a few of the people that physically knew Phil during his life. Now, that there have been around about maybe 4 or 5 biographies of Phil, but mine's going to be different because I'm going to be looking at the influences on him and his subsequent influences on modern culture, because the amount of people that acknowledge him, even if people aren't aware of Philip K. Dick as a writer, they'll know the movies. They'll know movies like Total Recall, Minority Report, The Adjustment Bureau, but they'll also realize that the Wachowski brothers, who did The Matrix, claimed quite specifically it was Philip K. Dick that influenced him. He was interested in the nature, what we've been discussing today, reality. What is reality? What it is to be human? What is it is to be an android? You know, in Blade Runner, one of his most famous movies, the idea of what's it to be conscious? Can we be conscious or not? You know, can we tell whether an android is alive or not?
And you're right, so many people that I've talked to over the years doing this show and shows like it have referenced Philip K. Dick. But it will be interesting for you to find out where the source of a lot of these people's inspiration, the man himself, where he got his inspiration. Oh,
he got his inspiration from the most peculiar of places. He had something called 2374. And 2374 was a series of events that took place in February and March of 1974, where he had what he called his theophany. And his theophany was what he called his encounter with God, or his encounter with his own higher self. Now, in my second book, The Daemon, A Guide to Your Extraordinary Secret Self, I discuss this concept of the higher self. Philip K. Dick experienced every single phenomenon that I write about in my books. This guy was it. Now, on top of that, he had experiences where he perceived himself in his own past. He was totally precognitive. A lot of the things that happened in his life, he even precognized the circumstances of his own death in a letter that I've got that he wrote to somebody in Alaska 6 years before it happened. He described in detail how his body would be found.
How did he die?
He had a huge problem with his brain. My brain's now gone. He had a stroke. He had a massive stroke, and he was living on his own at the time. And his neighbors knocked the door down to find him lying head down between a settee and a coffee table in his apartment in Fullerton. I think it was in Fullerton in LA. In the letter, he never properly regained consciousness. Although Tessa Dick, who was his last wife, who's now a really good friend of mine, Tessa, is a lovely, lovely lady. She has informed me that he did become conscious towards the end. And I think he was found on the Wednesday, and I think he died on the Sunday, something like that. But the interesting thing is, in his letter to a lady called Gloria Krentz Bush, his pen friend, in this original letter, he says, "I've just had a hypnagogic dream." Hypnagogia are those kind of feelings when you're half awake, half asleep. And he said, in the hypnagogic dream, I saw a middle-aged man lying flat on his back or flat on his stomach or head down between a chair and a glass table. He was seeing his own death sequence.
Wow. It is amazing.
He was a fascinating...
And how could he have done that? If he wasn't tapping into something, how could he have done that?
Well, the thing is, what is fascinating, Howard, is that if you read his novels, for instance, I always say to people, read Valis, read Ubik, and then read my first book, Is There Life After Death? He does the fiction of it, but this gets even weirder. People have told me he predicted me. Now, get this, if I'm writing a biography of him, there will be a book in existence at some time in the future will have the name Philip K. Dick and Anthony Peake on the same cover, okay? Philip K. Dick wrote a novel, I think in 1968, called Counterclock World. In Counterclock World, there is a character who is involved in time running backwards. He's being reborn and everything else. Philip K. Dick could have called this person anything, couldn't he? He makes up names, he makes up a name. He called him Anarch Peake. My name is Anthony Peake.
And is that your real name, Anthony?
Yes. And the first two letters, A-N, of my name and Anarch Peake would be the same. If he